And without further ado, we welcome the great John Rich into our studios for the first time. John, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me in.
Yeah, buddy. Applause in the background. It occurs to me, you and I have had a couple of good conversations at your place, which if you've never been to John's place, figure out a way to get there because it's fabulous. But I've gotten a chance to see you interacting with people over the last several years. Before we get into some of the specifics that I want to talk about, I wanted to ask you this, because you seem as comfortable on stage as you are walking through a room full of folks. And now I understand that most of the times that I see you, it's more of a conservative crowd, but I get the feeling that that's going to be John Rich, regardless of the people around him. You seem to be a man completely comfortable in your own skin.
Well, I know where I come from. I know what I believe. I know whose shoulders I stand upon. And so when you know all those things, some people don't. Some people don't have confidence in who they are or where they come from or what they're supposed to be doing. But I do know those things. And so it doesn't really matter the room or who's in it. I always kind of look people right in the eye and shake their hand and go, how you doing? And a lot of them I disagree with, but shake their hand anyway and move on down the road. Last time I checked, that's what it means to be an American.
Well, and with that in mind, I mean, exactly right. And with that in mind, I get the feeling, and one of the reasons that I appreciated you from the jump, it was not, I mean, the country music, I mean, all of that. I mean, obviously, you've got that going
obviously,
on.
Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy is your favorite song. That's what you're trying to say.
That's what I'm trying to say. And Redneck Riviera is my favorite bar in Lower Broad and my favorite whiskey. But beyond that,
did he bring whiskey?
He did not. He did not.
Throw him out.
Bell says you got to get kicked out because you didn't bring whiskey. Oh, he tell him the story about the last time we were in this studio.
The last time I sat at this mic in this room was with Phil Valentine, and they were impeaching Donald Trump. And I called up Phil and I said, I've got a hilarious idea for a cocktail with Redneck Riviera whiskey called the Impeachment Julep. And Phil busted out laughing. He goes, "Oh my, can you come in the studio and make that?" I said, "I sure can." So I brought a bartender in here and we set up a little mini bar and made impeachment juleps with Phil Valentine, and that was the last time.
I see no bartender. I see no bartender. Now I know where we rate.
Well, once Trump gets reelected, and the Democrats immediately try to impeach him, we'll bring some more impeachment juleps on the.
Yeah, we'll do another one.
Yeah, but it feels like that you're good as wrong as people want to be if they're on the political left. You're good with that. You're just not going to shy away from who you are and what your values are. It feels like in your world, in the entertainment industry, you're a unicorn, man. That there are a lot of entertainers that run away from their thoughts, their feelings about what we do on a regular basis for fear that they'll get destroyed. And you sit here, you're undestroyable.
Well, I'm no longer owned by anyone. And so by that, I mean, I don't work for a record company, publishing company. I don't have anybody that can tell me what to do. And it's honestly the most creative freedom I've ever had in my life. So I can sing and say and do an interview with whoever I want to, anytime I want. And a lot of the artists out there, especially the ones that are on the radio right now, they do have record deals. That's their American dream. Right. And they spent their whole life getting to the point where they were good enough to land a big record deal. And then they get in the middle of it and realize, holy cow, this is Sony, Warner Brothers, Universal, same companies that make all of our movies and everything else. And they've got the way that they do things. And if you perk up too loud, yeah, you will get hurt. And that's why you don't hear many of them talking. But I kind of subscribe to the old Charlie Daniels theory. That Charlie Daniels, I wish we had him around right now. And I bet everybody listening goes, amen to that. But, Charlie Daniels would come out, and if he felt strongly about something concerning the country, he'd just come out and say it. Well, it doesn't mean you don't like Devil Went Down to Georgia anymore. It just means, okay, that's what Charlie said, but he had a way of making you think about things and maybe even shine a spotlight on certain subjects you hadn't even considered yet. I always admired him a great deal for that.
And at what point was it always this way? Were you always kind of the type of guy that you said, I'm going to say what I believe. If I'm asked about any of these things, I'm going to say it? Or has it been the last 5, 6, 8, 10 years?
Yeah. No, I was not always like that because I was also in the machine. I was owned. And so it was my American dream to do that. I grew up in a double-wide trailer in Amarillo, Texas. I have a high school diploma. That's the extent of my pedigree. And I had landed a big record deal. I was writing hit songs, and I wanted to continue doing that. So with that comes some gamesmanship where I would like to do that interview. I would like to make that post. I would like to make this comment. But if I do, I may lose a radio station playing my song, or the A&R guy at the record label may decide to hold our record for 6 months, or something like that could happen. So I didn't. But when my 2 sons were born and started to get old enough where they could understand a little bit what was going on, I watched them watching me one time yelling at the TV like we always do with all this nonsense going on. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, look at these people, what they're doing on TV. I can't believe they voted this way, or they're trying to do this. And then I'd put on my gear and walk out the door and walk on the red carpet and play patty cake with the same people I was just yelling at. And it struck me as so hypocritical to be like that, that if I'm dealing with this right now in this modern age, what in the world are my kids going to be looking at when they grow up and move out of the house? And the only blueprint they have is, how did Dad do it? Was Dad's integrity for sale? Was Dad a hypocrite? How did Dad roll with this? Well, if they see that Dad didn't, and Dad took a lot of hits and got knocked down a bunch of times and held his ground, that's what I hope they do too.
Were there any points along, and I want to get to the specifics of why you're here, and we hear your voice on the radio station quite a bit nowadays talking about a particular candidate. We'll get into that, but I'm compelled. Was there a point where you were worried that they would get the best of you when you started speaking out? Or did you kind of protect yourself on the front end to make sure that speaking out, because I wish that there were more of you, but I understand that I don't understand like you do.
They're in a tough spot.
I mean, they are in a bad place. Was there any point along the line where you thought, man, this might wreck me?
Yeah, there was. And that started to wreck me and by proxy, Big and Rich and everything else we were doing. Radio stations wouldn't add a record because they didn't like something I said in an interview, or things like that started to happen. But I decided, well, what's more important to me, my freedom of speech or the approval of the music industry? Because you can't have both. And so I thought, you know what? Freedom of speech. This is going to get expensive. And sure enough, it did. And you will not hear any of my new music ever played on a country radio station, save maybe 1 or 2 that are just good friends, ever again. It will not happen. But that's okay, because the trade was worth it. Being able to be an American and not sacrifice your integrity. You're not for sale. Set a good example for your kids, your neighbors, your friends, people that are listening right now, even going, hey, they will give you a black eye and they will give you a bloody nose. Might even break your leg. They'll hurt you. But at the end of the day, if you can survive that and keep coming, you're a different animal at that point. And I like I said earlier, I feel more free now than I ever did when I was at the top of my game in the music industry.
It feels like the entertainment industry operates in a similar fashion to what we see on mainstream media, in as much as if they were even keeled on it, that would be one thing. Mainstream
media is the entertainment industry.
Well, I mean, they're one and the same, right?
That's I look at news like they program it like entertainment.
Yes, Bell.
Did things ever get tense with Kenny because of your positions and the way you became outspoken, or did it not matter to him?
No, it never got tense with Kenny, to his credit. And, Kenny and I don't agree on a lot of things, but we're a good example of how Americans can disagree on big subjects and we still walk out on stage and harmonize together, and sing to people. And our kids are friends, and family friends back and forth. So no, he never did. If you asked him directly, he would have to answer. I bet he probably bit his lip a couple of times like, dude, this is going to hurt,
Yeah, I say it this way. And everything changed in 2015, 2016. But I've always said in the 20 whatever years that I've done this, I've never dropped a liberal friend because of politics. But I've had a hell of a lot of them drop me. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of liberal, well, not a lot, but I had liberal friends, particularly up until Trump. And most of them dropped me after Trump. And it bothered me for a minute until I realized I didn't change. They changed. I believe that people have every right in the world to see the world the manner in their choosing and all of those things. And we have the right to freely express ourselves. You're doing it the right. When you talk about your relationship with Kenny, I mean, that's the right way to do it. You can disagree. You can still be brothers. You can agree to disagree, and you can move on with things. And like you say, harmonize. What's frustrating to me is the number of liberals that have decided They don't want to harmonize anymore. They don't want to accept that we're going to be different. We're going to protect rights, the rights of children, the rights of people who can't protect themselves, and we'll live freely and believe what we believe. I truly believe that a lot of people on the political left want to break you down and break Matt Murphy down.
Well, I will say that I think the harmony note from the left is getting louder by the day, because the more pain that is inflicted upon this country and upon them individually in their own zip codes, the more they are waking up to the fact that this is not going well for any of us. And I've said this before, that unity will happen in America when our shared pain becomes intolerable. You know, there are things in this country right now happening and that are going to be happening over the next several months, I believe, where you're not going to care if your neighbor's a Democrat or Republican. You're going to have the same exact problem as your neighbor does.
Is it important for us to be kind of joyful warriors? I mean, it occurs to me, you say that, and I recognize we need to be welcoming warriors, as opposed to, you know, well, you were wrong, you were on the wrong side of history, you know, you need to sit over there and take it. We need to welcome those people into the fold and say, look, there's a better way to do this.
Yeah, I absolutely think that. And you'll still disagree with them at the end of the day, and you don't have to vote for them, you don't have to raise money for them or whatever. But I'm serious. I think when you listen, everybody's zip code has fentanyl in it. Everybody's zip code has all kinds of problems going on in it. It does not discriminate on how you vote. It is just here, and we're all living in the middle of this soup right now in this country. And as it gets more intense and more painful, I believe unity will begin to happen more and more. You can already hear, as I said, that note of harmonizing unity coming. Some of my friends that used to talk to me like your friends dropped you are now calling me and going, hey, what's going on, man? Ain't heard from you in a while. Man, what do you know about this situation or that situation? And then you'll have a 2-hour conversation. You realize they're starting to think because the pain has now encroached on their doorstep.
And from a political perspective, I always say the best thing that we have going for us is that liberals think we're dumb and they always overplay their hand. And I see that happening in the White House, where they have enough control and power of Washington, D.C., they've decided to play these notes across the country, and they include a border that doesn't have any security whatsoever.
Right.
And when the American people that don't really pay that much attention, they're just out and about, they're listening to country music, listening to John Rich, whatever, they're working on the farm. There are hardworking Americans that don't pay that much attention to what we do on a day-to-day basis. When they start getting affected by it, when they start seeing it at their back door, they kind of wake up to it. And when you wake up the country that exists between L.A. and New York City, let me tell you something, it's a powerful beast. You see it every day.
Yeah. I mean, we see it in our concerts.
That's right.
We get up and there's 10 or 12,000 people out there, and I'll ask the question. Let me ask you a question, everybody. Do you still love America? And wow, they screaming at the top of their lungs. And I said, I don't care if she's upside down and inside out. I wouldn't trade our country for any other country.
That's right.
On the face of God's green earth. How about you? And they all scream again. And there's a spirit out there across the country that is on fire right now for the country and for the future, and they're concerned and they want to see it fixed. I
want politicians, and I want to pivot to this local race that you've involved yourself in, because I just want politicians to be honest with me. Tell me where they are on issues. Tell me where they've been on issues, and let the voters decide for themselves where they go from there. And
what else do you want? You want to win the lottery? That'd be another thing. You want a golden egg to hit you in the head?
Is it too much to ask?
It's a lot.
I mean, frankly, and I know we got to take a break, so I don't want to get into this Chris Spencer race here in just a moment. But I mean, I think that's ultimately what Donald Trump represents. I think people forgive Donald Trump those personal failures that we've all had in our lives, because he represents a pure honesty with regard to what he sees as the problems that exist in this country. We can agree or disagree, but there's no question that when he tells you what he tells you, it's what he believes, and he's not controlled by anyone else. And I think that is, more than anything, the driving force behind his popularity.
Yeah, I think an honest argument is something we can respect, and a dishonest argument is something you can't trust it. At least you know whatever that person is saying, they really believe it. And I do know people on the left that they wholeheartedly believe everything that they stand for, and they've got a reason why they believe it. It's how they were raised, where they come from, however that was around them. And then you got to sit down and have a conversation with them and talk about, but what about what's going on right now? That's when the conversation begins to turn.
We'll turn the conversation to local politics, because you've heard John on our station talking about Chris Spencer as a candidate for state senate. We're going to find out why he supports Chris, what it is about that race that got him interested, and we'll do that next on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. It's 1:20 on Super Talk. Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Matt Murphy, joined by John Rich. Such a pleasure to have him in studio. Of course, John is obviously known. I don't need to introduce John from a country music perspective. I don't need to introduce John from a political perspective. He doesn't shy away from his political position on matters. He tells the truth as he sees it, speaks his mind as he sees it, and we need more Americans like him, and I appreciate him being in. And now he has lent that voice to more local races here in the state of Tennessee. Tell me how this kind of happened for you. That have you been looking at Tennessee politics for some time? I mean, obviously you live here, so I imagine you've been paying attention to what's going on, especially since COVID-19. Hold on. Thank you there, Bell. Thank you.
I think, since 2020, when everything hit us all at once, you start paying attention more to what's going on locally, because you could look around the country and depending on where you live, they got different sets of rules for everything with COVID and schools and masks and vaccines and on and on and on. So I was really curious how our state politicians were dealing with this. It was affecting us directly in our own homes at that point. So I started digging down into people's voting records and trying to understand who was who. I didn't know much about it. And then you get down in there and you start running across some voting records that are astonishing, especially when they're professed Republicans, conservatives, and been in office for a long time. And you start to read how they've been voting, and you go, hang on a minute, that cannot be right. And sure enough, it is. And so as I was looking in to District 18 for the Senate, which is Gallatin and out in that area, there's a guy been there since 2013, Senator Farrell Hale. And I don't know him personally, and I didn't come here to give my opinions of him. Everything I wanted to discuss with you today was basically his voting record, because this vote's coming up. And it would normally be none of my business what somebody was doing in a district I don't live in, but the bills he's authored, the bills he has supported, and the bills he's voted against do directly affect my family and your family. So as I got into that, I thought this cannot stand. And a new guy who's never been in politics, Chris Spencer, stepped forward. He said, listen, I'm a dad, I'm a business guy, and this is ridiculous how this voting record has gone. I want to take a shot at this and try to run, and I really don't have any name recognition or anything. So I invited him over to the house. I spent a bunch of time with him, asked him a lot of questions, just feeling this guy out. One of the most sincere people I've ever sat with. And you could tell he hates politics. I mean, it turns his stomach to think about what he's trying to do right now, which to me is the best qualification for someone to run in politics. We need, I mean, John Adams said only people that detest politics should run for office. You know, George Washington did not want to be the president. He's begging him, please find somebody else. So I had a lot of respect for this guy who was willing to step in there and do this. And so I got behind him, and people have started talking about Chris Spencer like, yeah, I'm digging more into his positions, and even more so the positions of the guy he's trying to knock out, Farrell Hale. Can you believe some of the bills that Farrell Hale has authored and voted for? So I appreciate you asking me to come in today. I think a lot of people just aren't aware. They're too busy. Frankly, I'm too busy. I've been in 5 cities in the last 9 days. I got 2 teenage boys. I got a lot going on too. But this is important, and 2024 is important. It's important that you pay attention to what is going on and take a few minutes to understand who exactly it is you're voting for.
I've often said that I think we do it backwards. I don't know how to fix it, but I think we need to pay attention more to our local school board than necessarily we do to Washington, D.C. We're probably a part of that on talk radio that leads us to D.C. as opposed to the local school board or the local city council races or your local state senate race and House of Representative, because that oftentimes matters more at your front door than do some of these issues that happen in D.C. Now, nowadays it's a little bit different because some of those issues are kitchen table issues too, like the fentanyl you mentioned. But toward that end, when I first started delving into Spencer's desire to serve, I looked into Farrell Hale's record, and I did what you did. And I was, surprised that he supported a piece of legislation, and I think it's become a central piece in this campaign, that there's a lot of different ways to look at it. They say, well, he gave us the first step toward banning prepubescent surgeries, mutilation surgeries is what I would refer to them as, hormone or puberty blockers, talking about these transgender type surgeries that went on at Vanderbilt. He passed a piece of legislation some years ago. Governor Lee signed it, and on its surface, it looks good because they're doing something about stopping some of this. But you delve a little bit deeper, and that's where it starts to get odd, John.
Yeah, so Senator Hale authored this bill. It's Bill 126, if you want to go look it up, SB 126. And he used a very specific phrase in this bill. And the phrase was Tanner Stage 1. You ever heard of it? I'd never heard of Tanner Stage 1. I have no idea what that is. So I went and looked up in about 5 seconds, what is Tanner Stage 1? Tanner Stage 1 means a prepubescent child, so a child under the age of 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old. And the bill protected those kids from all the things you just listed. So 8 or 9 years old. There's a Tanner Stage 2, 3, 4, and 5, all the way up to age 18. The door was left standing wide open for stages 2, 3, 4, and 5. By de facto, when you say we're going to protect Tanner Stage 1 and not 2, 3, 4, 5, that means, okay, so 2, 3, 4, 5 is still wide open. So that's anybody 9 years old or older in the state of Tennessee is still in harm's way.
And that's what Vanderbilt, the medical center over there, that's what they were taking advantage of.
Right.
Over the last couple of years, that they had to slam the door on last session once the curtain was drawn back and everybody became aware of it. And Matt Walsh was intimately involved in that. And I know, I mean, a lot of us spoke on it after it was exposed that they were committing to these types of surgeries. That's the door that was left open that you're talking about.
That's correct. And so there's a couple of things going on here. Number one, Senator Hale needs to answer the question, why did you put the phrase Tanner Stage 1 in the bill that you authored? Now, his background is he's a pharmacist. So he's a medical guy. He understands medicine. His big donors are Eli Lilly and Pfizer and HCA and all the big medical companies and groups. That's who gives money to Farrell Hale. And so, number one, Senator Hale, why did you put that phrase in the bill? Number two, why did all of our legislators not get on their computers on Google and go, what is Tanner Stage 1, and read it for themselves before they signed it? Mm-hmm. So the admission to the fact that they were duped into doing that is substantiated by the fact that they had to pass another bill 2 years later. 2 years later, that door stood wide open. Pass another bill that now doesn't say Tanner Stage 1. It says anybody under the age of 18, which is what it should have said in the beginning. So 2 years, the door was left standing wide open by a politician who was funded by Big Pharma and all the big medical companies out there. And the question is, why did you do that? I mean, listen, he's not a dumb man. He's a very smart man. Matter of fact, I'd say very smart, because he was able to put something into a bill that everybody went along with, trusting that he knew what he was talking about because he comes from that world, and got him to sign it into law.
Well, it leaves him in a very precarious place. And, I mean, clearly he hears you asking the question. He'll hear Matt Murphy asking the question. I don't know, to my knowledge, he's not answered this question, why it was important to put that into the bill. It had to be repaired 2 years later, so it was obviously a mistake in the bill to put it in there. So it puts him in the position of either you were duped, or you didn't know what you were doing at the time that you wrote the legislation, or you did it intentionally.
Well, that's quite a phrase. I mean, Tanner Stage 1. I mean, that's a pretty specific thing.
So you were either confused and did it wrong, or you did it right. Either way,
in either case, the results were the same.
Right.
And so that's just one thing, okay? That's one thing. Remember the red flag law we all had to fight against last fall with tooth and nail, and were able to put that down? Well, he co-sponsored that bill too. There was another bill that came through during COVID when people were trying to get their hands on ivermectin and other medications to, try to treat their symptoms, and the pharmacies wouldn't let anybody have it. Remember that? You couldn't get it. They just wouldn't get it. So the legislature drew up a bill that says pharmacies in the state of Tennessee have to give their patients, their consumers, these particular drugs. It was ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine was on there, and others. And Farrell Hale voted against that, voted against it. And so why is that? Well, look at his donor list. Again, these are not my opinions. These are his votes, his voting record, and these are the companies that give him money to vote this way. So it's a big deal. It's not just District 18. District 18 needs to wake up and pay attention right now. I agree with you that he seems like a really nice guy, and I'm sure he is a really nice guy. I'm sure I'd like him personally. But that's not what we're talking about. The stakes are so high right now. A bill that he authored left the door standing wide open to Tennessee kids from ages 9 all the way to 18. One last thing, if I can.
No, please.
There was a bill called 1944, and I gave a speech in front of the Tennessee House Legislature committees when we discovered all the pornography in the schools throughout Tennessee. We found all that. I gave a 5-minute speech. That speech led to a lot of our legislators drawing up a bill, Bill 1944. It was moving through. It was going to get passed, and all of a sudden it hit resistance from who? Republicans. A lot of Republicans started pushing back against this bill that would have made it really bad if you got caught with pornography in front of little kids in Tennessee. Guess who didn't support that bill? Farrell Hale. So Senator Hale has a lot to answer for. These are not opinions. This is his voting record.
Well, look, and I would say the door is open. I welcome Farrell Hale to come in and answer some of these questions, but it does merit it merits additional scrutiny why you would pass something like this and use the specific language, particularly on the Tanner bill, the 126. Why would you use this specific language, knowing what that language is, if the goal was to stop any and all of these surgeries for minors in the state of Tennessee? Why did you specifically author a bill that would leave the door open for most of the minors in the state of Tennessee?
Good question.
To have these types of surgeries. Real quick timeout. Questions for John, comments for John. He's open to that. I'm open to that. We've got one more segment with the great John Rich in studio on Super Talk 99.7 WTN and the Matt Murphy Show. Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Matt Murphy. John Rich in studio with us this hour. Rebecca and Matt have questions for John. We will get to you, I promise, in just a moment. Rebecca and Matt, if you have a question or a comment, best way to get through is on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, and it is absolutely blowing up. Hearing all, I'll just give you an example. John Rich sitting in with us, 1063 says, hearing all of this makes me sick. Hale's exactly what's wrong with our General Assembly, and most of our Republicans in our General Assembly know it, including our governor, all for Republicans working against us. Look, I would suggest that, for me, it's not personal, and you've made that clear too. I don't know the guy. I just want the best government to represent the people possible. And I don't think that this bill, this 126 particularly, and some of the others that you mentioned, I don't believe that the people of Senate District 18 feel well represented by this type of legislation.
And they probably didn't know about it. That's the honest truth. You can't keep up with this stuff, man. People are working and raising their families and doing all they can to get by right now, and they're not paying attention to that. And I paid attention to it. I took a long time learning it, making sure I really understood what went on here. And once I was sure this is what had happened and that's his voting record, somebody has to talk about it because he's not the only one. Other people need to look at their representatives too. I will tell the folks in District 18, you are not stuck, okay? I know that makes you furious hearing how he's voted and the bills that he has authored, but you're not stuck. Chris Spencer stepping up, not wanting to run, but knowing something has to be done because he knew about this voting record. I got a lot of respect for a guy like that. And I would urge the folks in District 18 to take a really hard look at Chris Spencer and go, you know what? Let's give this guy a shot and see how he votes. I can promise you he won't be voting and writing bills like Farrell Hale has done. You are not stuck. There's one other thing going on in Sumner County. The election commissions has been allowing Democrats to vote in Republican primaries, which is not supposed to happen, been happening in that county and swinging and swaying elections back and forth.
So the Democrats are crossing over, doing a little cheating.
Yeah, but that's not allowed in the state, but they're doing it anyway.
Right.
And so the eyes in Sumner County, folks, you need to call those people and say, hey, I don't think so. Because listen, Democrats probably love Farrell Hale. They probably love him. They would much rather have him in there representing them than Chris Spencer, a constitutional conservative. Chris Spencer, they don't want that guy. They want the guy that'll say Tanner Stage 1, and they want the guy that'll work with Big Pharma and do all those things. So you guys have a real situation on your hand in District 18. The primary vote is on August the 1st. You've got time to read about this and learn about it. And March 28th, I will be with Chris Spencer in Gallatin, 6 o'clock, doing a campaign kickoff event, shaking hands. We're going to be speaking and hanging out with everybody. Everybody can come. You go to ChrisSpencerForSenate.com, grab a ticket. That ticket goes to support his campaign. And I hope I see you out there. It's at the Epic Event Center in Gallatin.
March 28th.
March 28th.
If it helps the effort, I'll tell everybody that I'll be there. If it hurts the effort, then we'd be way in the back and you will never see me. But if it helps the effort, I'll be there.
What if we got your wife up to sing Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy instead of you? Instead of you being that's your favorite song.
It would be.
See, that's worth the price right there.
It would be the moment of my life if you managed to get my wife up. My wife had a question.
Okay.
It's more broad with regard to politics, and I want to ask it. She wrote it on my notepad. What?
How dare she?
I know. I can't believe it.
His inner sanctum.
She violated the inner sanctum. What vibe is John getting from the people when he goes out on tour across the United States of America? What is he feeling? She obviously she wants our next president to be Donald J. Trump. She is also conditioned to be a little bit of a pessimist. And so she's worried, and I think I can read into the nature of that question. What can you say to my wife right now, John, that'll give her a little hope that things are moving in the right direction in terms of the vote this November?
So the way I gauge an audience is how much energy comes back at me from the audience when I say something to them, and I can tell you that it is so intense. When I ask them a question about America, or I bring a veteran up on stage or something like that, it is deafening. And I think every country artist that says things like that on their stage will tell you exactly the same thing. And this is everywhere. This is from Oregon to Florida to Maine. It doesn't matter where I go. When you walk out and say, do you still love America? It is so loud. I mean, it about blow the microphones up. So I would say the spirit of America is alive and well. I think it's hotter than it's ever been. I think people are fired up. They understand that we're on the precipice of losing a lot of what we love about our country. They're watching it dissolve right in front of their eyes, and they do not want to see that happen.
Let's take a couple of questions. Rebecca has been holding out a Hendersonville question for John Rich. Rebecca, you're on the radio.
Hi, John. The first time I met you was the day you gave that speech in Nashville. It was my very first political involvement after moving from California. But I just want to know what we can do to support Chris, because as a former Californian moving to Tennessee, Farrell Hale terrifies me like Scott Wiener terrified me in California. Is there anything more than going to his event on the 28th?
Yeah, you can.
Thanks, Rebecca.
First of all, you're the kind of Californians we want in Tennessee, so we're glad you moved here and hope you love Tennessee. Yeah, you can go to that event on the 28th and show up and support there. But I would start when you're on Facebook, when you're with your groups of friends, and start talking about Chris. Go to his website, ChrisSpencerForSenate.com. Learn about this guy. See where he came from. See what his platform is. Learn about his family, his businesses that he's run over the years. Get to understand this guy. And I would just say, can you do any worse than Farrell Hale? Can you do any worse for the people in District 18 than his voting record over the past 3 or 4 years? I would say no. So I would just spread the word. There's a lot of power in local conversation. And I think that is one thing I hope everybody starts to focus on. Let DC be DC. We'll handle that as best as we can. But on the local level, in your own backyard, look into a Chris Spencer, compare him to a Farrell Hale, and vote your conscience. I've
gotten enough of these. I think it merits me to kind of encapsulate all of your questions along these lines. I'm just reading from them, John. I'm not here to embarrass you. John Rich for governor. John Rich for U.S. House of Representatives or U.S. Senate. John needs to run for something. Why doesn't John run as a candidate? Have you ever thought about it?
Yeah, I get asked a lot about that. And I tell you, my main job right now is raising my 2 boys, Cash and Colt. And, one of them's 14, heading to 15, so they're not going to be around a lot longer. So I don't know what I'll do down the road. That's such a big thing. The boss, meaning the Lord himself, would have to tap me real hard to make me do that, because I absolutely detest politics. I hate everything about it. I don't trust them. I don't like the rooms when I'm in with those people.
Hey, wait a minute. A smart man about 15 minutes ago said that you want the politicians that detest politics.
Do. Well, okay. So if I'm at a point in my life where I feel like the job at hand is to do something like that, I wouldn't rule that out. But right now, that's not anything I'm considering doing. What I do like to do, though, is the interview I'm doing right now, which is to talk about things that I run across and put a spotlight on it that other people may have missed, and make them aware of what their surroundings really are.
Well, and there's no question that you have that ability. And I want to make clear, because I've got a guy saying, are you going to kiss his feet when he walks out, Matt? No, I'm going to hug his neck, though, and here's the reason. Because you, through God's gift that he gave to you, you have a tremendous platform, and you could just be doing concerts and making money. You don't have to do any of this. But you are, because you love our country, and you are because you love our state. And that's what I appreciate about you, is that you're bringing it, you're doing your research, you're doing your homework, and you're speaking your mind, and you're doing so in a way that people, obviously you have a platform that people want to listen to, and you respect that platform, and you use it for the better good. And I appreciate that.
Well, it's somewhat of a responsibility, because there's a lot of people out there that know the same things that I know, but they can't get on a radio station.
Right.
They can't get on TV. They don't have a big social media account. But they know exactly what I know. They love their kids too. They love their state too. They're worried about the future too, just like I am. And because I'm able to get on a radio station with somebody like you, then you got to go do that, man. I mean, you can't, when the enemy calls me bad names, I get really happy about that. That makes me feel great. There's a verse in the Bible where Jesus said, "Rejoice when you're persecuted for bearing my name." Rejoice, like be overly happy about it. And so I would urge everybody out there, if you're not getting hate every single day from somebody from standing for what you believe in, you're probably not doing it right. You need to up your game a little bit and get a little hate coming back your way. That's how you know you're having some impact.
One more quickie for John Rich. Matt is in Gallatin with a question for John. Matt, you're on the radio. Go right ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, fellas. John, I appreciate what you said about being bold enough to speak the truth, even when you know you'll be attacked for it. There are so many people here in Sumner County who support Chris but can't say anything publicly, especially our teachers, and are even afraid to donate because of the machines is so strong here. How would you encourage them, or what would you suggest to do to support the candidates in the political establishment that says they can't?
I would say let's tap back into the men and women that founded our country in the first place. Can you imagine if they had that attitude towards the Brits? Can you imagine if they were like, well, I want to do something, but I'm afraid they're so powerful? That's not what being an American is all about. Listen, if you stand back and let them continue to steamroll you and go in there with their pen and paper and put things into motion in this state that are absolutely wrong, like the bills we just laid out that Farrell Hale did, then you're part of the problem. You have no more excuse. You cannot gripe or complain about anything if you don't do something about it. And what's more important to you? Your future and setting an example for your family and your neighbors and everybody around you, or keeping your mouth shut and nobody ever calls you a bad name? Which one's more important? I mean, that's where we're at. This is no more time for games. This one particular bill, SB 126, allowed horrible things to happen in the state of Tennessee for a very long time. And when people do things like that, whether it was out of ignorance on his part or it was on purpose, neither one of them is a good answer. Tanner Stage 1 is not something you just pull out of thin air. So I would look at it very hard, and I would look at yourself really hard and go, why don't I be somebody? Why don't I stand up? Why don't I make a difference once and for all? Because the game is over. There's no more gamesmanship. We're playing for the future right now.
Well, and I want all of you to think for yourselves and recognize that there's an answer to this question. And John Rich can't answer it. Matt Murphy can't answer it. Farrell Hale can answer it. Where is he? I mean, and all I want is for Farrell to step up and answer these questions.
Would you have him on the show?
Absolutely. I'd have him on the show. I'd have him and Chris on the show. We could have a nice little discussion. And Chris Spencer has said that he would be agreeable to come on.
Well, he should do that.
I mean, and Chris has been on alone. And look, Farrell, the The door is open. And I would say I'm not asking anybody to make a determination based on what Matt says, and I don't want to speak for John based on what John says. Just do your own homework based on what John has told you today. I know I did. And it created a lot more questions than I have answers for. And I'm very, very confused why someone as intimately involved with pharmaceuticals and the ability to get good medicine to our children would be so involved with a bill like this and get it so wrong. It's odd to me that it would happen the way that it happened, the way that you've described it.
Yeah, and that's why we're having this interview. You know.
All right, so March 28th?
March 28th at the Epic Center in Gallatin, Tennessee, 6 p.m. Chris Spencer will be there. I'll be there. You might be there.
I'll be there.
Matt, you might be there. And you can go to ChrisSpencerForSenate.com, and there's a banner right there. You click on that to get a ticket. That ticket price will go to support his campaign. Right now, Farrell Hill has $400,000 to $500,000 banked from Pfizer and Eli Lilly and HCA and all the other ones. And Chris is, I mean, hardly anybody knows who he is, and so fundraising's a real big thing for him. So if you want to make a difference, bring all your friends, get some tickets, and show up.
And honey, I know you're listening. Get that singing voice ready. As John says,
save a horse, ride a cowboy. What?
You know, something you said, I'll leave you with this, and something you said inspired me. What you said about our founding fathers and their reluctance. It reminds me, there's a scene, if you've never seen the miniseries John Adams, starring Paul Giamatti as John Adams, there's a scene in it where he and Abigail Adams are in bed in Braintree, and he tells her that he has to go back to Washington, and she bursts into tears. And I think of that scene when I think about the type of politicians that I want, that are sacrificing for their families for the greater good because God compels them to do so. And I feel like in a lot of ways you've done similar things over your career, because there have to be moments, as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, where you're like, man, I need to just be quiet and play my music and make my money, but you're not built that way, and I'm glad you're not built that way.
Well, thanks for giving me a microphone to talk on. Again, I will reiterate, the games are over. We lived through 2020. We saw what the power of the pen can do, how it wrecks our lives, wrecks our families' lives. We've seen what the power of pen can do in SB 126, leaving the door open and putting our kids in harm's way for a couple of years till they had to reverse it. This is big stuff, man. This is big. And don't forget, Tennessee has a thing called the 10th Amendment, states' rights. And so when you have a legislation that's pulling in your favor and will vote like you vote and talk like you talk, when Biden or anybody else tries to put something down on us from the federal government, if Tennessee is in alignment, Tennessee can say, yeah, we're not doing that here, and just push right back against it. But you have to have the right people in the right places of power to vote that way, just like you would.
That's a great segue into what we'll be talking about next hour, because when we come back, we'll say goodbye to John. We will be talking about an event happening tomorrow at the state capitol involving the 10th Amendment and our right to push back against this encroachment regarding non-border security and illegal immigration. We'll be doing that next. John, thank you for your time, brother. We appreciate
you, Matt.
you.
See you on the 28th.